Okay, my name is John Shaw. I'm a graduate student at the University of Memphis in musicology, and this is October 10th, 2018. I'm interviewing Myles Wilson in Somerville, Tennessee, and I guess for the record, just a little bit of biographical information about yourself, Mr. Wilson.
Okay. Well, I'm Myles Wilson, born here in Fayette County in Oakland, Tennessee, 1946. So that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I worked in Fayette County in education all of my life. I'm retired and been retired since 2009. I'm married. Have my wife and I have two children, four grandkids.
Okay. So, when you were growing up, was there a lot of local and indigenous music in the county? I mean, aside from recordings and jukeboxes and the radio stations, were there local musicians, and what's some of your earliest memories of local music?
Yeah, they had local people. A lot of them were into spirituals. Ep Wilson, he had a band, a group. They played spiritual Christian songs. And the Broadnack brothers, I remember them. They beat the drums and at the picnics with Buford Evans and around Brewer, Tennessee, Longtime. Everybody knew about the Broadnacks brothers and their drums. Uh, there were other artists that came in. They weren't from Fayette County. Al Green and all these people played over at Mason. B.B. King, when I was a real young fella, played at Owens Cafe in Oakland. Um, that was I probably was 5 or 6 years old then.
Wow. So, I think you had told me at one time there was about 100 little schools all over Fayette County.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
music part of the curriculum that kids got in these schools?
Oh yeah, every school. We had PTO and PTA meetings where parents would come in and children would sing, and you had music was a big part of the curriculum at all the schools. They would have nights where you have talent nights and that kind of thing, but music was always a part of the curriculum.
So now, as for the Broadnecks brothers, you mentioned a place. You mentioned someone named Buford Evans. What did
Yeah.
he do?
Buford was a farmer, and he hosted a lot of picnics, and he ended up running a cafe in Mason, Tennessee, in his latter years.
Where was it? Where were his picnics held?
On Highway 194 near Highway 59. He had a farm there, and that's where the picnics would be.
Wow. Were they any particular time of year he would do these, or
Oh, it was yeah, summertime. It would be warm weather.
were they like for specific holidays, or just?
Oh, definitely holidays. There would always be holidays, but he had them just weekends.
Wow.
Wouldn't
Okay.
necessarily have to be a holiday.
And he would hire the Broadnecks brothers to play.
That's right. They would provide the music, and people would come from miles around to hear them beat the drums. And I didn't get a lot of excitement out of it, but people sure did.
Were there fife players too?
Oh yes, oh yeah, yeah.
Now, were they using the bamboo cane? They making the homemade type of fife? Is that how they were doing that, or
No, no, I don't remember that, but they could have been some of that. No, I
Yeah.
don't know. A young fella at a picnic, not paying a lot of attention
So
to
you
that.
used to go?
Oh yeah, everybody went to picnics. Yeah,
Wow.
they didn't have any age limits.
Wow. So, were the Broadnecks brothers the only fife and drum band in Fayette County at that time, or were there
I don't
others?
think so. There were others. They had picnics in Oakland on Highway 64. Owens had picnics there on Highway 64, and then John Harris had picnics on Warren Road right off 64.
I used to hear somebody told me there was a place out that way called the Wagon Wheel.
That's it. That's exactly where it is.
I went all the way down Warren and I didn't see
You won't
any.
see any signs or remnants of it.
Only thing I saw was a place that said something about Fayette County Citizens for Progress.
Oh, it's further down than that. Yeah, I'm on the board there at Fayette County Citizen for Progress. Now, it used to be one of the schools right there, corner school,
Oh,
a
okay.
little 2-room school.
And that looks like a place you could do a picnic nowadays.
Oh yeah, they have picnics across the street. They have a pavilion there, and they have barbecues there.
So so there were picnics in other parts of the county as well.
Oh yeah.
What
yeah.
about out toward like LaGrange and Grand Junction out on that?
Oh yeah, here on let's see, Jonathan Road. They had picnics there, and my grandfather had picnics there on Feathers Chapel down in Knowles. They call it Knowles Bottom. He had a lot of picnics.
And these, usually the entertainment of these would be fife and drum.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the day before the DJs and all of that.
Wow.
But they would have drums and have people singing. Clarence Nelson was a guitar player. He was from the Feathers Chapel, Knowles area. I remember him, and he played with some of the bigger bands. I don't know if
I think I've heard the name.
yeah, Clarence Nelson. Yes.
And so this was basically, did the fife and drum bands also play for things like funerals or weddings or?
I've never seen them at a funeral, but I'm sure they could have.
And I know that in some areas in Shelby County, it seems like a lot of the fife and drum bands were affiliated with fraternal organizations and social clubs. Was
Right.
that also the case in Fayette? Were there black lodges and fraternal organizations that hired the fife and drum bands?
Oh yeah, they had. Darlis had a large hall there. They had a large hall in Oakland, I remember, and oftentimes they had entertainments. They had picnics too.
And I've heard people speak of there being fife and drum bands and picnics at Fredonia. Did you ever hear about that going on?
Yeah, that was a little bit far for me. I didn't get over that far, but I know where Fredonia is now, and I'm sure that's accurate.
So in addition to this kind of activity, I assume there was also blues going on as well.
Oh yeah.
And I guess what were some of the places that booked live music in Fayette in those days where you could actually go hear performers, and who were some of the people that?
Yeah. Well, Mason was the big place. Of course, Mason is really in Tipton County, but most people think it's in Fayette County. It's right at the border there.
Yeah, it seems culturally more like Fayette. It doesn't seem to have a whole lot in common with Covington or Rumford.
Right.
It seems like, as far as the lifestyle and the atmosphere of Mason, it seems more like part of Fayette.
Yeah. But Mason was the place where people went. They had cafes, and the first Saturday in the month you couldn't walk in Mason. That was called Trade Saturday, and combination of the grocery store people and the hardware stores and the cafes, they all would get together and they had a crowd. And Tay-May Club came into play in the 60s, early 70s, late 60s and early 70s. And they would book a lot of big names at the time. Al Green, Johnny Taylor, I'm trying to think of the other guy that was there a lot. He was a blues singer. Little Milton.
Yeah.
Little Milton
He was
Campbell.
still playing there in my day.
Oh,
I remember
yeah,
seeing
yeah.
posters about him playing there in the 90s.
Yeah. Of
Now-
course, all these places had crap games in the back, shooting dice. And
So why was Mason the place? There were probably a few cafes in Rossville and elsewhere, but what was it about Mason as opposed to, let's say, Galloway or, You know.
Well, Mason was kind of wide open. They call it. You could do things you weren't supposed to do, like selling alcohol, and they weren't wet, so to speak, but they could always do it in Mason.
Wow.
So they were connected to the police and sheriff and all these folk. So they could do it. And gambling, gambling was illegal, but they did it in Mason. I've seen the police gamble with the people at the table.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of gambling at one time because there were actually casinos near Mumford.
Yeah.
I've read articles about it.
Is that right?
What was called the Dixie Mafia, that they supposedly had, like the Turf Club and something else, and these were like on 51 just across the line from Shelby.
Right.
And for a long time there was one over at the Haywood Tipton line on 54 called the River Club.
I see.
And apparently, there was a relationship between the sheriff and the people who ran those, and for a long time,
no doubt about it,
they got away with that. You know.
Yeah.
But now, as these cafes open, let's say in Mason, how much live music went on? Aside from Tay-May, which is obviously another whole story, did any of the others also book actual musicians?
Some had musicians, and they still do until today. Some of them book live musicians right now.
A man has just opened one.
Yeah.
Actually, a man named Saul Whitley.
Yeah, Saul.
He opened
I know Saul.
Blue Room, and they booked some.
He had a band about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, he had a keyboard player and a guitar.
Yeah, what they call it.
They said it was a band.
Yeah, that's right.
I was up there.
Yeah, were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, so were there any specific musicians, local to, like, let's say Brownsville, Covington, Somerville, that were frequent players up there on the lower end? Were there certain well-known musicians that everybody knew?
I didn't know of a lot of local folk. Most of the people came out of Memphis. They had a lot of different groups in Memphis. One band in particular was called the Memphians. Curl McKinney and Julius Bradley and some of those guys.
I know Curl's son very well.
Is that right?
Paul McKinney's on the faculty at the Stax Music Academy, trumpet player. Great musician.
Well, the Memphians played up there a lot.
They recorded for Willie Mitchell.
Yeah.
They recorded for his Pawn Records subsidiary.
Right. And Willie Mitchell had Ann Mitchell. She was the booking person as his wife.
Yeah.
And this gal came out with a hot song. We had her at Tay-May once. I'm trying to think if she was Ann Peoples.
Ann Peoples sounds right.
Yeah, okay.
The seems like there were some big clubs back in the day there, like the Black Hood, and just certain places that were really popular there on the Front Street. Yeah,
well, we booked Ann Peoples at Tay-May, and they got there late, and we had a early closing time, so they didn't perform. So she just had a hit record out. I think it's Tear My Playhouse Down or something like that. So by the time we rebooked them, we booked that Tay-May too, kind of out from Mason a little bit, and they could stay open all night.
That was at Keeling, right?
Yeah. We had to turn people around that night.
I can't find the location of that either, but it was close to, a friend of mine owns a house up there that was built in the 1820.
Yeah.
Faculty member at University of Memphis, Ted Macklin.
Yeah, okay.
And he owns a house up there called Oak Hill.
Okay.
And Oak Hill's historic. They don't have a marker.
It was up there pretty close to that little Gaylor school up there. I've been there several times.
And there's no trace of that anymore. That was torn down.
Right.
And I don't know if Gaylor ever had a band or any kind of music either. But
they should have. They had a good basketball team. I know that.
Yeah. I don't think they did football.
No. None of the rural schools did football because football, we had split school. And when it's time to play football, we would be in the field picking cotton. So you couldn't play football and pick cotton at the same time.
There was a concerted effort. I think that had a lot to do with the closing of Gaylor, in which they boycotted the schools that were on split session.
Right, yeah. Well, I graduated in '63, and They still had split school when I
They
graduated.
tried to do it in '65, but
Yeah.
that's when the kids that had come in from New York and California and other places
Yeah.
were organizing the teenagers to
Yeah.
boycott the district. I don't know if
Right.
they did that in Fayette. They certainly did in
Right,
Tipton.
I don't think so. We started school the day after the 4th of July. That's when school started.
Wow.
And then we would break in September and go back after Thanksgiving.
So now, as for Tay-May, I read that it was originally opened by a man named William Taylor. Did you know him at all?
Oh, yeah, I knew William Taylor, yeah.
So did he also own the legendary Tay-May in Chicago, the famous one that record albums were made?
It's my understanding he did. He was from Chicago, he and his wife, and that's how they got the name Tay-May, Taylor and Mary.
But why Mason? And I will say that I know that the last name Taylor has significance in Mason. Were his people from there? Is that why he came?
He had some relatives in Mason, yeah. He had relatives there. The gentleman ran the club after he did. I can't remember his name now, but they were related.
So he brought these big kind of uptown clubs to Mason.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
And I've heard that Rufus Thomas played there too.
Yeah, Rufus Thomas played there several times.
And it would seem like probably somebody, who else? But Johnny Taylor, perhaps?
Yeah, it was two Taylors. There was another Taylor that played there quite a bit. We had one of the Taylors. It wasn't Johnny Taylor. It might have been little Johnny Taylor. It was more than one Taylor.
Yeah, little Johnny Taylor was from California, but
Yeah.
he was recording for a label out of Shreveport
Right, okay.
at the time. It had, what was the big hit he had? Open House at My House.
Yeah, yeah. But the Johnny Taylor, he was big time.
So, of course, what ultimately happened, my understanding is William Taylor got in some trouble.
It's my understanding, too, he was arrested and had to serve some time. So he lost as a man in Covington, Slim Hotseat, who ran the liquor stores over there. He owned Tay-May at the time we purchased it. We purchased it from him. So how he got it, I don't know.
And then you had it along. Who all was involved in your effort when y'all got it?
That was Clarence Macklin and myself. We were partners. We bought it together. We leased the first couple of years and then we bought it.
And the state of Tennessee actually shows a business charter for number 3, I think. It must have never opened.
We filed for a private club status and received it, but we never did put it into action. We thought we could do that in Mason, but people didn't take to that too kindly. So we just never did get it going.
But looks like y'all brought in some of the best blues in the area at the time.
Yeah. And we started the DJ thing after the bands. People told us we were crazy and nobody's going to pay to come hear somebody spin records. They could just do the jukebox. But we started off with DJs, and it turned out to be a big thing.
Now, they call these places, other than Tay-May at least, they call these places cafes.
Yes.
Did they have food? Did they actually sell food?
Oh, food was a big sale item.
Yeah, I'm told one of them was the predecessor to Gus's.
Yeah, well, Gus's, Mary and they are related to me, Mary and her sister. They had a cafe up on the square up there where the rest of them were. And then they built the little place out on the highway where it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And they named it Gus's Chicken. But it was really just a cafe.
I think it had been called Maggie's at one time.
Yeah, Maggie, that's the name I was trying to think of. Reuben Maggie. Yeah, Reuben Maggie.
Interesting. So, now in addition to Mason being the big place of all of this, what about, you mentioned Owen's Cafe in Oakland.
Yes.
And they would book live music.
Oh, yeah, Henry Owens had what you would call a big cafe there in Oakland. It's a nice stone building, block building, I should say. But it didn't have a floor in it. It was just a dirt floor.
Wow.
But they had big times in there.
And a lot of people would come in. Huh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, in addition to that, I remember there being a few cafes in Rossville.
Yes, yes, they had them on the railroad track there.
Do you
Right.
remember? Do you recall any of the places and what went on in them?
I just remember going there when we were in high school. We would ride down there and walk up and down there. And also in Grand Junction, Tennessee, right out of Fayette County. It was the same way. They had a lot of cafes there, and people would walk up and down and talk and that kind of thing.
Were these booking live music, or were they just playing recordings, or what?
They had bands. Yeah, they had bands at that time.
Wow.
Yeah, bands were popular back in the day.
Yeah. What about in Moscow?
Uh, they had some cafes on the railroad track also in Moscow and LaGrange. LaGrange was one of the big places where people would come out from Memphis on the trains. The rich people would come out there and shop. That was in early 1900 and late 18 after the Civil War. That's where all your generals and all lived down in LaGrange. And people would come out on the trains to do a lot of shopping down there. But these were middle class, upper middle class people.
Interesting. So, what about in Somerville itself?
Somerville they had all kinds of places in Somerville. They had one out here called the Dewdrop Inn or Greenville Inn, it was called. They had bands that had a basement in it, one way down, one way back out. So if a fight started down there, you tried to be the first one out of there because there was no exit. You just had to come out the same way you went in. So
Wow.
Johnny Loftus, he was an undertaker. He owned that. And he owned several cafes here in Somerville around the square.
I remember there being like a little district sort of down from the square, down from where the Fair
yeah.
Theater was.
Oh, yeah.
I remember seemed like there looked like there might have been cafes down there.
Oh, there were
one time.
cafes lined up all down there. Loftus owned most of them. He had a barber shop around there also. He has a funeral home. Where the funeral home is right now was a cafe.
It seems like they've been tearing down that whole area for some
Yeah,
reason.
it was a Chevrolet dealership next to it, so they made a park out of that.
Interesting.
And one or two of the little houses still there, the little house with no bathrooms and all. One or two of them are still there.
And
One guy lives in one of them, but the other two, nobody lives in them.
then was it you telling me that there were some to the south of the town limits out toward where W.P. Ware High School was? Where there?
Yeah, now that was where Greenville Inn was. And John McFerrin's grocery next door, his brother had a cafe there. That building is still there.
Were they doing live music in there too, or was that?
I don't remember any live music being in there, but they could have.
Then I remember when I went out Jernigan, I think it was maybe a year ago, I saw a place that clearly looked to me like it had been a nightclub or a cafe.
Yeah.
Out toward Park School as you head out that way.
Right. Well, they had some big picnics out there they call Asbury picnics, and they had those up until maybe 7, 8 years ago. That would be people would come from the north, they'd come home just for that kind of thing.
That must have had something to do with the Methodist Church, because the name Asbury always has to do
It's
with...
right. It's right there at the church, at Asbury's church. The picnics and all were right there together.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a CME church.
Well, that makes sense. And so you think you had told me that there was a branch of the Pole Bearers in Fayette County.
Yeah.
Where were they based out of, and did they have fife and drum bands at their?
Yeah, I don't know where they were based, but down in the Knowledge community, they were in that area. They had some land down there, still on land down there. And up near Asbury, and here they had the lodge. They have a nice lodge hall right up here at the Greenville. This district out south was called the Greenville community. That was kind of upper middle class neighborhood for blacks at the time, because the high school was there, the Fayette County Training School was there at the time. and the teachers and everybody built their houses right around that area. It's called the Greenville community.
I always wondered about that because it seemed like it was directly south of Somerville,
Yeah.
along the road there. I
Oh,
guess
yeah.
where Macon Road branches off from.
That's exactly where it is. It was a high school there where we all went to high school.
Oh yeah, that was the
Fayette
South
County
Campus.
Training
That was the
School.
South Campus in my day.
Yeah, later it was changed to South Campus. And the school here was changed to North Campus.
Yeah, because we used to have to play Fayette. I went to Bartlett.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
yeah.
we used to have to come over here.
Yeah.
But what about out toward Macon? What went on out on that end? Was there more of this?
Macon the same way. All these little towns had these little cafes and little gathering places. Macon had them. Oh, it would be so many people down there you couldn't walk.
Now, what went on at a typical picnic? If you went to one of these things back when they were held, what could you expect to see and do?
Dancing, playing ball, gambling, you name it, drinking moonshine, all of it was there. Yeah, at the same time.
Wow.
That was a typical picnic. And the wagon wheel picnic that we talked about a little while ago, that was huge. That was huge.
Yeah, so the person that mentioned that to me was actually from the Mount Pisgah community in Shelby County.
Right, right.
But apparently they would come on over.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also told that there was some of this kind of activity as far as picnics and fife and drum bands around Eads, too.
Yeah. That's a little far from home for me, Eads.
Yeah.
We didn't get that far.
And I was also told that there were a bunch of cafes in Collierville.
Well, I do remember in the East they had a huge picnic there, right where the Fayette Shelby line joins there, and I can't remember what it was called, but it would be a lot of people there. It's right there before you get to Arlington Collierville Road on the left.
And is that a place where were they doing fife and drum bands at those
Oh,
things?
they were, and they had a big hall there. I guess it might have been a large hall or something. It was huge.
Then now the blues musician Little Joe Ayers from Benton County mentioned going to Grand Junction, Tennessee, and I think he said it was the 4th of July, or it might have been Labor Day.
Yeah.
And he said it was 1970,
Yeah.
and there was a fife and drum band there.
Right,
at
they
the
did.
picnic.
That would have been the time that we were going there in the late '60s. We would go to Grand Junction nearly every Saturday night.
Wow.
We a lot of times we just sit in the car and watch the people walk up and down there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So why did all this kind of stop? I mean, nowadays you don't hear about these big picnics. I mean, I think there's a woman in Fredonia that still does one at Labor Day.
Well, some of it had to do with violence. They had violence at these places sometime, and people have been killed there, really.
Well, I read where there was a Belmont picnic. I saw an article, and that at the picnic, for some reason, a young man shot and killed a deputy sheriff.
Yeah.
And fled to the north, and they never, and then I think they eventually found him and brought him back to put him on trial.
Right.
15, 20 years later.
Yeah, you might be talking about the Bird Dotson case.
Well, it's similar, but this was a different guy.
One.
This one, apparently, this guy was a bootlegger, and
okay.
because he shot the deputy at a picnic, which near Belmont. I now know where Belmont is. Belmont is over there,
close to Mason.
Yeah. And but there's a Belmont CME church, so that's probably
right there on the corner,
roughly where the picnic was held.
They had a Belmont school over there too. It's not there anymore.
The only one I knew of was called Braden Sinai. And
this is closer to where that church is.
Someone has turned that into quite a showplace residence.
Right.
They've made that into a really attractive house.
Right.
Yeah.
But this school was Belmont.
Oh,
and
wow.
they had a Bernard school also. They were fairly close.
I think there's still a Bernard Community Center.
I
think I've seen
I'm on the board there at the Bernard Community Center.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned the brewer community too, and you said that was a place where picnics went on.
Oh yeah, they had to get the brewer on a holiday. They had big picnics over there. Everybody went there. So they had a school over there also.
Yeah. Now, I read somewhere that in the Broadnax Brothers band was a snare drummer named Plaz Rivers.
I've heard of him. They called him Players. I never.
Yeah.
But
And
I've heard of him.
according to Ben Olson, he was the father of Homesick James.
Yeah, could have been.
The name is common enough in that part of around Mason. There's a lot of people with the last name Rivers.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
But I didn't know if you'd ever heard of him.
Yeah, I Pledge River. I have.
That's probably him.
I've heard of him.
And apparently he played with the Broadnax Brothers
Right.
band.
But John Davis had. They call him John Demp. John Davis had the picnics over there.
in the brewery.
Right. Now, I understand his father was a doctor way back in the day. Dr. Davis.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And let's see. It seems like I don't want to forget something that I need to recall. So, well, I guess that is. Well, you didn't say what ultimately happened to Tay-May. I know it.
Tay-May burned. I got out of it in '82, but Clarence Macklin continued to run it from '82 until about '92, and it burned, and it never was rebuilt.
Yeah, apparently the one at Keeling was gone long before that.
Oh yeah, it was.
Now, do you ever recall a place called the Cypress Inn?
No.
Because John Marshall, the historian up in Mason, mentioned going to a place near Stanton where there were a lot of blues musicians playing.
I've seen some cafes up along that road up there, but I never have gone to them.
Yeah.
There was one here just recently, further up the highway there, going toward Brownsville, kind of like a country.
Yeah, it is a country place now. And I'm thinking that may be where the Cypress Inn once was. When it was the Cypress Inn, it was a predominantly African-American place.
Be. Yeah.
But it apparently changed, and now it's either a private club or members only or something.
And there was a Hobson Cafe on Highway 64. They used to call it the S curve. The highway was so crooked. They called it the S curve. A lot of people had accidents in there.
Was that west of Somerville or east of Somerville?
That was west of Somerville, between Somerville and Oakland.
I remember where that curve was because I remember when 64 used to be like that. That was at Warren.
Yeah.
That was at Warren.
It was called a Dewdrop Inn. Yeah.
The Dewdrop Inn.
Yeah,
huh?
Dewdrop Inn.
And they had
John Early Hobson ran that.
And they had live music in there.
Oh yeah, they had music. They had it all dancing, and it was a small.
Now was Fayette basically dry? Were they not allowing liquor or?
That's right. Yeah, Fayette is still dry, the county, but Oakland and Somerville are wet now.
They allow liquor. Huh?
Yeah, they have liquor stores.
Did Fayette always allow beer or not even beer?
Yeah, you can get a beer license for beer, but you couldn't do it on Sundays.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if you can now or not.
I'm not sure either on Sundays now, but you probably can. You can open a liquor store on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess in addition to all of this kind of music, then there were quartets.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of quartets.
And
a
gospel
lot of gospel quartets. That's Ep Wilson. I mentioned him earlier. He turned out to be a preacher later, but he had a quartet. I used to go to their house and listen to them practice. Yeah.
Of course, the only one I knew of growing up was, and only I guess because one of their members was our building superintendent at Bartlett that took care of our building.
Dean, you're talking about George Dean.
Yeah,
he's from Fayette County.
The Gospel Four.
Yeah, they still playing right now.
Wow.
Yeah, he's still going right now. He and his brother and two or three more people.
Them I know about. I know about one called the Holy Nightingales from Mason.
Yeah, that's Richard Boone and Let's see who else is in there. Catfish, they call him. He's his last name is escapes me right now, but I know all of them well. Yeah.
So when things got into like the '60s, were there not like young people in Fayette that said we want to put together a soul band? You know, we hear what is going on in Motown and Stax and everything, so we're going to put together a band here in Fayette County. Did that ever go
I
on?
guess a lot of people tried it. They had some little groups that never went anywhere. See, singing was a big part of the curriculum in high school at the Fayette County Training School. In the ag department, they had a competition singing, and I mean, you had some real singers. The Dean brothers you're talking about, they came up through that. They competed with other clubs around the state, and William Vassar was the teacher who was sponsoring that. But they called them the NFA. The blacks were New Farmers of America before they merged together as Future Farmers of America. Yeah. So they were NFA quartet. And the Jordan, Douglas Merle, all these people sang in that NFA quartet.
Wow. So did anybody ever make a record? Did anybody ever have like a little 45 and they were from here?
No, I don't ever remember that. Of course, you know Terry Wright, who's one of my students. He's out there getting.
I did not know he was from Fayette.
Oh yeah,
he's a big name.
He's one of my students.
He played at Como Day last year in Mississippi.
Oh yeah, he attended Oakland Elementary School and Fayette Ware High School here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, what has really happened? I noticed all the cafes are gone from Mason. They've torn down almost everything.
There's four of them still.
Yeah. What is causing this decline? All the ones in Rossville I can remember are gone.
Yeah, I guess politicians, they come in, have different ideas about things, and they kind of like Somerville here. They had them here, but I think politicians kind of played a big part in closing them up.
One thing I didn't mention was also, I know out from Mason, there's a huge baseball park. Mm-hmm. That's privately owned and events go on out there. Was that true also in Fayette? Were there privately owned baseball and softball fields?
Yeah, just right down the street here in Somerville, they had a private one also.
These apparently were a big deal in black communities at one time. These private ball fields that went on.
Right.
I don't find
blacks played a lot of ball back in the day when I was growing up, but the baseball diamond was in cow pastures. You might go down and scoop the ball up and scoop up something else. But the cows had to get out the way. They all were out there. They had to chase them out of the way, but we made our bases and all, and they were big. I mean, you had some good baseball players back then.
Yeah. Nowadays, the one that still remains, I think, is called the Zodiac Park, and they do car shows out there.
Yeah,
I don't know if they've ever done music.
But they don't do a lot of baseball. They do softball, the fast pitch. But back when I was growing up, it was baseball. They called it a hard ball.
Yeah.
And people, you had the Little League, you had the Negro League in Memphis where you could move up and play on a professional level. So we had some good people. The Giles brothers, and, Jeremiah Dickinson, and all these people played baseball.
And I guess a lot of people have moved away from Fayette.
Oh, they have. People were leaving Fayette in a hurry because of opportunity. There was nothing here but farming at the time, but now people are moving back because of transportation and everything. A lot of people live here, but they work at FedEx or International Paper or some of those places. So leave Somerville and go to Memphis now is nothing. Used to be almost like taking a trip to California, try to get to Memphis, because people didn't have transportation.
Yeah.
But now you have 4-lane roads and speed limit is up, and people have good cars, and going to Memphis is nothing now. Going to Memphis used to be a big thing.
Wow. Well, I guess That's the bulk of what I wanted to find out. Are there some other people that I should probably try to talk to that might have more knowledge of some of these
Yeah,
bands
some
and
older
picnic?
people, if we can find some whose minds are still good, they would know a lot more about. Now,
Oh,
that's a man, Al Maben, he's 99, but his mind is pretty sharp.
I might need to interview him. I tell you
Now,
one thing.
he probably would know this lad at Merle because he's from
Yeah.
around Macon. He's right there at Maben's funeral home on Tig Store Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know one thing I didn't ask you about. In 1980, the state of Tennessee, the Department of Archives, or it may have been actually through the Arts Commission at the time, but it's in the archives now, recorded a fife and drum band from Fayette County, run by a man named Emmanuel Dupree and Ed Young. And I wondered if you'd ever heard of that particular band.
I don't know that. I don't recall either one of those names either.
Yeah, I don't know what part of Fayette they were from. Most of the recordings were done at Chickasaw State Park in the next county over, but that's because the state was doing a Tennessee Folklife Festival
Right,
at the park.
right.
But the archive says the men were from Fayette County, but it doesn't give a location.
Yeah,
And Fayette is a truly large county.
sure.
They could have been from any part of Fayette, so I didn't know if you'd ever
Fayette's the
encountered.
third largest county in the state.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, I appreciate you for your time, and thank you for the information you were able to provide.
Sure, sure.
Thank you very
That's
much.
good. That phone didn't ring the entire time we were talking. Isn't that something?